Okay, now we're live. Okay. Good afternoon or good morning to some of you. And welcome to the seventh annual Latina Book Festival here at the Pueblo City and County Library. For this exciting program, I'm going to be the host of an interview with Peruvian author Melissa Rivero, and I am Professor Juan J. Morales, poet and professor and department chair of English and World Languages at Carl State University Pueblo. And please stay tuned for some exciting unpredictability that comes with the Zoomness of the world, but also stay tuned for about 20 after. We're gonna have a trivia question that you can use the chat in the comments to win a Spanish or English copy of Melissa's wonderful book, The Affairs of the Falcóns. And so to get things started, I'm gonna very quickly read Melissa's bio, and then we're gonna have some conversation, some questions, and feel free to use the chat to ask any questions you might have for our distinguished author. Melissa Rivero is the author of The Affairs of the Falcóns, which won the New American Voices Award and was nominated for the PEN Hemingway Debut Novel Prize, the Aspen Words Literary Prize, and Center for Fiction's First Novel Prize. Melissa was born in Lima, Peru, and raised in Brooklyn. Undocumented for most of her childhood, Rivero became a U.S. citizen in her early 20s. Her writing has taken her to Vona Voices workshops, Breadloaf, and the Norman Mailer Writers Colony. In 2015, Melissa was an Emerging Writers Fellow at the Center for Fiction. She is a graduate of NYU and Brooklyn Law School and currently works on the legal team of a startup. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband, 2 sons, and their rescue dog. Melissa, thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. All things considered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I'm hoping you and your family are staying safe.
Yeah, we're trying to stay home as much as possible. We wear masks everywhere. In New York, I feel like most people are very good about that, and that's helped a lot with our numbers here. But yeah, it's quite a juggle to do childcare, working from home, and writing in a pandemic. But doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, just to kind of help get the conversation started, one of the questions on my list is about your general writing process. So can you tell us all about your writing process, and if you want to talk about how COVID-19 has made your process evolve or not, or devolve,
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a full-time job. And I've had a full-time job during most of the years that I worked on my first novel, and I was a mother. I have 2 kids, so I would typically write when they were little in the evenings after they went to sleep, and on weekends. And then once they started going to school, I would drop them off at school, and I would write during my commute on the subway for 40 minutes or whatever. And then I would write on the weekends. Now with the pandemic, I don't have the commute, which is really hard because those 40 minutes was precious to me. I would write on my phone, in my notes app, or on my notebook. In my notebook, because I tend to handwrite most of my work first, and then I put it on a computer. But I didn't have that, and so it was very difficult for me to readjust to the pandemic, and nor did I have the coffee shops that I would escape to on the weekends to write. I live in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, and so I would spend a lot of time in coffee shops on the weekends writing. And so it really took a lot of getting used to at first, sort of living with the pandemic to sort of figure out how it is that I can write. Mm-hmm. I've managed to now write still on the weekends. My husband will take my kids for a couple of hours, and I'll do a little bit of writing. I tend to write in the mornings, but not as frequently as I used to. So in that sense, it's certainly devolved. In other ways, though, it's actually helped. I've developed new ways of writing. So right now, I have on my wall these huge Post-it notes, and that's sort of where I I scribble and put out my ideas for this new project that I'm working on. And so that visualization does help. But trying to carve out the time is difficult. We're all in this like tiny place, and I'm with my kids 24/7. And so it's hard to get any sort of distance and compartmentalize my writing time, you know?
Absolutely. So, on a similar note, how does your identity as a lawyer, a mother, and a full-time professional shape your writing in other ways, like you talked about the process side, but what about like the way it kind of comes out in the creative in the actual work?
I would say that my day-to-day job is not like, you know, it's boring in many ways. You know, I do contract work. So I look at contracts most of the day. I solve business issues. So it's not like I'm going, you know, deep into, you know, the human psyche or like emotions or anything like that. But it does give me a bit of before the pandemic, it gave me an opportunity to see how people behave in the workforce and relationships. And, you know, I don't like gossip, but I certainly enjoyed seeing people's interactions and like how maybe I do like gossip a little bit, but how they like interacted with each other, the dynamics, you know, how that sort of played out in meetings and on calls and all of that. So in that sense, like not the legal work itself, but like just the basic work of being in that kind of an environment, I thought was really interesting. But the way that the legal training for me at least has come in is more so in the way that when you're in law school, you have very limited time as well. And so you develop this sort of discipline in terms of the case laws, like your reading time and then your writing time, you know, the cases that you're reading about and the analysis that you're then doing after you read these cases. And so I've kind of applied that to my writing process. Not, you know, like it's made me more disciplined in terms of like sitting down, tackling one chapter or one scene at a time, and then going back, reading it, and then being like, okay, well, what flows after this? So creating some sort of like connection, I guess, which I feel like I did learn in law school. And frankly, being a mother, I think has influenced my writing more than my legal career. That has certainly given me a new perspective, I think, on the stories that I tell, and the different emotions that one can have. You know, how you can feel sort of like everyone needs you and you're always present, and at the same time feel invisible, you know, as a mother. And yeah, so that's how I think those two elements come into play.
And especially the you know the role of parenting and the, you know, the identity of motherhood, or the role of motherhood in the affairs of the Falcóns, like is one of the great points of tension in the book. It keeps things unpredictable, but it also really shows how human and dynamic your characters are in the book. So for our viewers that haven't had the opportunity to spend time with your book, how would you summarize the book? Like, what's your you know, like how do you summarize it?
I mean, the elevator pitch, it's, you know, it's a story about an undocumented Peruvian mother who is trying to keep her family afloat in New York City in the 1990s.
Yeah, and well, I'm my mother's Ecuadorian, so I was relating a lot with this book as well, and her own journey to the United States and path to citizenship. So, in the book, how much of your personal life inspired or found its way into the work?
You know, so the impetus for the first scene I wrote was inspired by something that my mother told me happened to her when we first arrived in this country. And I sort of like imagined what she must have felt like have experienced this particular experience. And I started writing, like, I imagined it, I wrote a scene, and I loved the character that came out of it. And so then I wrote another scene, and I sort of like discovered Anna and the world that she inhabited that way. But in many ways, it's a world that, obviously that I know and that I'm familiar with, because, we have a very tight Peruvian community here in New York. There are not that many of us, but growing up, it was all, that every weekend my mother and my dad would have, parties, and it would just be like the community coming together, coming to our apartment, and it was great. So that's certainly taken from personal life. And I wasn't documented up until about age 9. And so in many ways, I think that when I first started writing the book, I wasn't a mother. And then by the time I finished it, I had 2 kids. And it wasn't until I was done with it, and I started talking to editors who were interested in buying the manuscript, that I sort of realized, like, I was really trying to heal like an old wound in many ways by writing the book. I knew the fear that I had as a child of being separated from my parents, or being taken from, or my brothers being separated. Like that's like a very vivid, even like the feeling itself feels very vivid in my body. But I didn't know, I couldn't contemplate what it would be like to be separated as a mother from my children, right? So I think that and the different feelings that one does feel when they become a mother, in terms of like their own identity. And so I did explore, I think, some of those in the book subconsciously. I don't think I was, trying to, but I feel like in many ways, like that's just what came out.
Okay. Yeah. Did I know in that answer you just said that you became a citizen at the age of 9. So when did you arrive?
No. I got my green card when I was 9.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So you arrived in the United States at the age of 9.
No. I came to the United States when I was about 1.5 years old when my parents brought me over. We came and we did, overstayed our visas. As one does, like sometimes. So we overstayed our visas, and Reagan passed his Amnesty Act in 86 or 87. We qualified, we got temporary residency, and then officially got our green cards when I was 9.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and I think the book does a great job of kind of weaving the historical tension of coming to the United States so well, and into it as well. On a similar note, as a Latinx woman writer, what obstacles and challenges have you encountered in the publication process? We're segueing into some of the lighter questions, obviously.
Yeah, so. I think I was very fortunate in the sense that I don't think I experienced too much of it. I mean, my book went out. It went out over the summer, like the first time, because it went out twice, and we didn't get any bites. And I think it only went to like I don't know, 9 or 10 or something people. I don't remember. And so my agent was like, why don't we move one chapter to later in the book and see what happens after that. So I did that. And you think that that's easy. Oh, it's just like copy paste, right? Yeah. Like cut and paste. But no, it like complete, because now you have to like introduce people in different places, and so it became a whole thing. And it took a couple of months for me to actually make the change. And then once I did, and she sent it out, I think from the time that she sent it to the time that I got my offer, the time that we sold it was like maybe 10 days. It was like it was very fast.
Wow.
So, yeah. And then give me a cup. Sorry, my kid just came asking me for juice.
We need juice is important.
Yeah, well, Gatorade. It's not just like, but because he knows I'm doing this, I can't say no. So yes. So it was very fast for me. so in terms of selling the manuscript, but in other respects, I mean, you know, I appreciate a lot of the love the community has given me. I wish that it wouldn't be limited to that. I sometimes feel like, you know, it's not like I'm writing a book that is only for Peruvians or only for.
I'm gonna close it. Don't shake it.
or only for people of American descent, you know. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Good man. Beautiful.
Yeah, but sometimes I do think that it's, you know, the publishing world, the publicity behind it sort of pushes you, like tries to limit it in that way in some instances. I mean, I don't really have any complaints. I feel like my book did get a fair amount of exposure in places that aren't exclusively that don't exclusively speak to the community. But yeah, I mean, like any writer, or like any novelist, or like any author, you want to see your book in as many hands as possible because you want people to read it and experience it and maybe, you know, learn something, you know, change something about them, you know, through that experience.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of moments in the book where it challenges and open. You know, I think it has the ability to change minds or kind of open up perceptions in a lot of meaningful ways.
Right.
I think we also mentioned at the beginning of our program today that the book was published in English and in Spanish. So was there any additional experiences connected to having it in both languages?
Yeah, that was an interesting experience because it was a different publisher, right. And they translated it. The translator, I believe, was in Spain, so he was a Spanish.
Oh.
A Spanish translator of Spanish. But and so it's funny, when I first got the translation, like my characters would say things like vale, and I'm like, we don't say that in Peru. Like that is not a word that we use. and I grew up very much like, you know, my parents were like, oh, the colonizer, you know, like the el español, you know, like they did not, yeah. And so I was kind of mortified. I'm like, oh my God, my father would be like rolling in his grave if he heard these characters say vale. Like he would just be so upset. So I was like, you can't, like, no. And then there were things that they would call it, like they would say fábrica versus factoría. And it's like, you know, it's one of those things where like maybe in Peru you would say that word, but like here in New York, we've like adopted so many words that are Puerto Rican and Dominican sisters and brothers use, right? So it's like, so the Spanish is just like, we adopted and the Spanish changes, right? The Spanish that we use changes. So I don't know, baby. I don't know. Please stop. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No, it's okay. Because I think that's an interesting, because I think you're right about the nuanced dynamics that kind of come with the language, because, you know, here in the West, a lot of the things you're talking about would incorporate like the northern Mexico slang, Spanish slang. But but it obviously makes sense in the Peruvian New York environment, you know, connecting it with Puerto Rican Spanish and Dominican Spanish. Those are important distinctions to kind of stay true to the experience of your characters in the world. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll find a clever transition into our exciting book giveaway trivia question. So, let's see here. You mentioned already, but just to kind of follow up further, you mentioned like the reception of your book has been positive, and you've received a lot of support. How is it having friends and family read the text and experience it?
It's funny. It's a good question. So I get calls from my sisters-in-law, and they'll always be like, you know, is Valeria Tia Judy? They'll just like, and I'm like, no, I didn't even think of her at all when I was writing this character. But they'll like, you know, make funny guesses as to who they think that he's, and it's like, it's no one actually. It's maybe an amalgamation of all the women in my life and all the men in my life, but not one specific person. My mother, I think, started reading it, but I don't actually think that when the Spanish language version came out, but I don't think she actually finished it. So I don't know. I think that in general, like my family is very proud.
Great.
And yeah, and I think that they've enjoyed the book. My friends are very supportive and they're very proud, obviously. So far it's been good, but I don't know how many of them have actually read it. So
that's fair, you know, but you know, family has love and respect for us writer folks. So that's I think that's the important thing at the end of the day. So
yes, exactly.
So I'm gonna quickly ask Melissa. I apologize for interrupting our conversation, but just for the people that are watching this, I'm gonna give you the trivia question for the opportunity to win a copy of Melissa's book in the Spanish or the English edition is what I was just told. So this is exciting. You have choices, my friends, to win the copy of The Affairs of the Falcóns. So your trivia question is, at what age did Melissa receive her green card? And you can put that into the chats, and I will figure out how, or the wonderful people at the library will figure out how to determine the winner. So, all right. So that I guess that's almost like a commercial break. So we're back in our program or something like that. So I don't know about you, but a lot of times, like, you know, during September 15th through October 15th, you know, it's Hispanic Heritage Month. So we, you know, our calendars get booked up. Maria, are you?
Sorry. Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I just wanted to see. Can you see the chat at all?
Oh, I got to click a tab. So this is a technical thing. Oh, here we go. I clicked the right thing. So
all right. Wow, so we've got like some answers, but we also have a question by Tara Ann. So I just want to make sure we get her question in.
Oh, cool.
Do you see that?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there are a lot of correct answers. So well done. I will deliberate with Maria how to determine the winner, because it looks like the times are very straight. Well, to kind of help us transition to some of the other questions, in the chat, we have a question from Tara Ann Cisneros for you, Melissa, that says, how long did it take you to complete your first novel? Which is always a fun question.
Yeah, it took me, I think, from the time that I wrote the first scene in 2011 till the time I sent it to my agent. Oh my God, what year are we? Probably about 6 years.
6 years.
6 wow. 7 years, I would say. Yeah, 6 years. 6 years, and then from the time that I actually sold it, would be about 7 years. Okay. Yeah. But you know, I mean, I had like a lot of folks who are aspiring novelists, or you know, you have other commitments and you have other work, and it's hard. It was hard. So I was trying to always find the time, steal time, you know, find the margins of my day to write. So whether it was in the mornings, you know, before work, or after my kids went to sleep, or, you know, when I had my second child, I breastfed for too many years. But I breastfed him, and I would go into a room at work, and I would have like my printed pages from whatever I wrote the night before. I would have those printed pages in my hand, and I would edit while I pumped. TMI maybe, but that's what I mean when, like, I say you've got to do it. If you really, like, if you're passionate about the work, you've got to find ways to do it. And I would edit it, and, you know, I was allowed 2 breaks, you know, or you would usually take 2 breaks, but then there came a point where I didn't need that second break, but I still went and took my 10 minutes and edited my work. So,
well, I think the answer to this question, as well as the question about process, you know, kind of writing on your commute, writing with any scraps of time you could find, is just kind of like a testimony to the necessary persistence that writers have to find to bring your work into the world. And I hope people, you know, watching this interview aren't discouraged by the 6 years, 7 years that it takes for a book to kind of come together. You know, I don't think it's discouraging. I just think it kind of reminds you
I mean, yeah, it shouldn't discourage anyone from it. And sometimes, you know, some writers write faster. I mean, it depends on what you're writing too. You know, I know some genre writers who produce a book a year, a book every 2 years, because that's what they write, you know. It's like it's a different animal. You know, so definitely don't get discouraged by it.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have a great question here in the chat, I think, on the topic of process, and Emily Daniels says, did you have a formal creative writing education going into starting your novel, or was your process towards writing it more organic?
Organic. I went to NYU as an international business and marketing major. I took one creative writing class when I was there, and then I worked in advertising for a few years, and I went to law school. So no, I had no formal, like I don't have an MFA or anything like that.
Right. And I think I really appreciate that question, and I appreciate your answer, because it reminds everyone that writing isn't only for the academy. It is not only for the people that have MFAs. You know, people can live, you know, work full-time jobs, have families, and still write. You know, it does require a lot of work and persistence, but
yeah. And also, I mean, what I would say is that I think it's important that if you don't have an MFA, or if you don't, you know, sort of go that academic route, it's important to still try to find community. So take a couple of classes, like writing classes, like locally if you can, or online. You know, those are also helpful. Start a writing group. You know, that's where you'll typically find people with whom you can form writing groups. I kept working on one chapter and perfecting it, I remember, and I would use that to apply to like Bread Loaf and Vona. And that's also where I found other writers who were have been instrumental in supporting me all these years.
That's great. Yeah, because I was actually about to ask you, like, do you have a writing group or a community where you share work still? Or
I do have a writing group. We've been writing together since 2011.
Wow. So
for a very long time. Yeah. And we're a good group. I've got some really great people there who have published work as well. And they're working on their second or third novels now. So it's really encouraging to be in that group.
That's great. That's wonderful. Don't worry. For the audience watching today, I'm sure you're all wondering like what Melissa's working on right now, but I'm saving that question for a little bit later. So I'm going to hold you in suspense a little bit longer. So, can you tell us? I was originally going to ask you about Hispanic Heritage Month and culture and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, can you? I think you've already touched on this, but just to kind of talk about it further, how does heritage, culture, and identidad kind of, you know, shape the writing that you do?
It certainly does it in the language. Sometimes when I write, the sentences just flow if there's a certain Spanish inserted in there, or if it is completely in Spanish. Being Peruvian, you know, again, like I was born in Peru. I don't have a living memory of a childhood there. Once we got our residency, we were able to go back every so often. But it was very much a part of my oh my God, what's what I'm looking for, of how my parents raised me, right? So my upbringing, sorry. So the food, Papi, I'm sorry, my 5-year-old isn't here. So certainly the food, like I don't think I ate mac and cheese until I was an adult. Please, Papi, until I was an adult. And so it was always it was always lomo saltado and like tallarín verde, and I was eating ají when I was very young. And you know, my mom helps me with my boys, and she is also feeding them those things. So when I give them my ham and cheese sandwich, they're like, "This is not food. This is a snack. Like, where's my roasted chicken and my yellow rice? I don't have time to make you these meals, kids." But anyway, but it's like, so food is very much a part of like, my life. And I think that you can see that, you can tell it's also because it's in my writing, it's in the book too. So but certainly being Peruvian and having that identity of being Peruvian and also being, quite frankly, a Brooklynite. I feel like I identify more with being a Brooklynite than anything else. Like those things I think help shape like where I place my characters, their makeup, the issues that they encounter and want to help resolve for themselves, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, your answer reminds me of one of my favorite scenes in the book is the New Year's Eve party. And, you know, because beforehand you have the kid that wants to eat the food and you know, early and that scene made me very hungry as well. But in addition to that, you can kind of see how the scene kind of sets up like some very explosive moments where you have all these characters coming together, you know, but you do have the dancing, you do have the celebratory drinking and things like that. So I think it really captures what you're saying.
Yeah. And just to touch on that particular scene, like I wanted to highlight some of the things also that like I think in my community we don't address, right? And really not just in the Peruvian community, but among other Latin American or, you know, immigrant communities too, colonized places that have been colonized, right? Which is the colorism, the racism, the homophobia, all, you know, and again, like I grew up, for better or for worse, hearing those things, but it made me cognizant of the ways in which we still need to improve, right? And how we need to, especially now, need to be able to talk about those things with our elders, you know, not just with people, our contemporaries or the younger generation, but with, you know, the tias and the tios who are in their 60s and 70s who can vote and should be able to exercise that vote, but need to understand also like where the colorism and the racism exists within our communities and what we can do to really effectuate change.
Right. And I really appreciate that you're anticipating one of my questions about politics, social justice, and activism, because one of the perceptions that I think this book does a wonderful job of doing is shattering that misconception that like, oh, they're all Peruvian, they all get along great. You know, it teaches and reminds people that there is discrimination, there is colorism within Latin American communities as well.
Yeah, I mean, my mother is from Pucallpa, which is like it's in the Amazon in Peru, and my father was from Callao, and he was, you know, a light-skinned, a white Peruvian, and you know, she's not. And they were married for decades, but even in their relationship, I could see the dynamic, the effects that sexism and colorism had on their relationship as well. So yeah, I think it's important that we discuss it and we recognize it. And it's not like it's not, you know, funny. I think a lot of it is sort of like covered in the jokes, you know, or people are just like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Like it's not, you know, dismissive of it. And it's like, well, no, where is that coming from? Like, right, why are we making fun, or why are we making these assumptions of people? You know, so yeah, I wanted to make sure that was in the book for sure.
Definitely. Another form of social justice and activism that I identified in the book is just having the empowered female characters that kind of show reproductive rights and other obstacles they have to kind of explore. Do you have any other insights on the writing of those aspects of the book?
Those are so those are things that we don't talk about in our community, right? Like we know, at least, I mean, I know that it happens. I know women in my life who've experienced it, but we don't talk about it. And I think that it's important to recognize that there are sacrifices that women make that are unseen. And by sacrifices, I don't mean like the actual thing that happens, but the fact that they're put in a situation where they have to make those decisions, you know, and what goes into that, right? Like, how they are giving up, they're working more, or they're so overwhelmed that these things sort of fall through the cracks for them, right? That it's not so those are the kinds of things that I mean, it's messed up, and so I don't want to give anything away, which is why I don't want to talk about it. But yeah, like what are we doing, taking it outside of the novel? Like, what are we doing to help women with reproductive care? What support are we giving them if they choose to have children, right? Yeah. How are we empowering them if we're, to make decisions that are right for them and not judging them for those decisions? Right. You don't have to have been in a situation where you have children in order to justify anything. It's simply something that is yours and yours alone. And we need to be able to just empower women to make their own choices on their bodies and what they choose. See, I'm giving it away, but what they do or don't do with it,
I have. It has been very difficult to remain spoiler free in talking with you about this, about your book.
Sure.
So we have about 4 minutes left on the clock. So if anyone else has any questions they want to sneak in before our time together is done, that would be wonderful. And one question that rolled in is from Regina Renee is, do you have any thoughts or opinions about National Novel Writing Month? Have you ever participated?
I think I tried doing it once or twice.
Yeah.
But no.
I always mean to, and then I'm just, November is the cruelest month for me in some respects, as they say. So, well, while we wait for other questions to roll in, I'm going to ask the always fun question to ask. What are you working on now? And what are you working on now?
I am working on another novel. I have a draft completed. So, wow. So that didn't take 7 years. I'm going to, now that this week for what it's worth was terrible for me. My husband's a photographer. He's on a photo shoot. He's away. So my mother, who helps me with my boys every once in a while, is sick. So she's not around. So it's been me with my kids for 12 hours a day, basically homeschooling and working from home. So I haven't had a chance to look at my manuscript at all this week, but I'm hoping that this weekend I can take some time with the manuscript and sort of figure out what my next steps are with it. But it's about I don't want to also talk too much about what it's about, but it's about a mother and a daughter sort of trying to evaluating their life after the death of someone important in their lives.
Wow. Okay. I look forward to reading that when it comes out and when it goes through the publication process. So, I think the last question that I'm going to ask is, do you have any last pieces of advice for aspiring writers?
Okay, give me 1 second so I can sit
of course.
I would say if you can, try writing a little bit every day. I know that some people don't work that way, but just try it. Even if it's just 25 minutes, 20 minutes a day, you'd be surprised how a little goes a long way and how much you can get done in 20, 25 minutes. The Pomodoro method, I think is what it's called, right? So you can get a quick timer, do 25 minutes and see how that goes. And maybe you'll have a novel by the end of a year if you work on it a little bit every day. The other advice I would give is Puppy, please, thank you. The other advice I would give is definitely find yourself a writing group. So whether that's by going to a writing class and sort of finding similar people who are in a similar situation that you are in, who have passion for writing, who have something that they're working on, find yourself a writing group. I do think that workshops are really great, the week-long workshops that are offered that you have to apply for, and all of those. I do think that those are worthwhile. And I know that the world is in a weird stage right now, but that's another way for you to continue to hone your craft and build community as well.
I think that's very, it's very good fundamental advice. I like that song. So I'm going to try to sneak in one last question that someone just posted, and then we will thank you and do our virtual applauses for you in all this wonderful time. So Reg S asked, how do you balance writing about these incredibly emotional topics in this very difficult time?
Yeah, that's a good question, because this stuff is it can be very draining, right? And you have to have the emotion, like the wherewithal to, everything's so overwhelming, and now you're going to go in and write about other, heavy topics. I try to read things that aren't so heavy, like in my free time. When right now I'm reading one of my friends, I'm reading Naima Coster's book, which is coming out next year, in March. So I'm reading that, but then afterwards I'll probably turn to a romance novel. I'm going to just put this one on me. I'm sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine.
I will. Yeah. So I'll read a romance novel, or, I like Netflix is great. Just anything that will, any sort of comedy that will take my mind off of things. I'm really sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine.
And I like TikTok. I know I know that probably the Gen Zers want the millennials off of it, but I do enjoy it. It's fun. It's funny. It's quick. If I ever need a laugh, I can just go there and find something funny.
Okay, perfect. Well, I know your book. I know your book navigates some very challenging topics in honest and beautiful ways. But I also think it gives us moments of hope, and to have a chance to talk with you and to read your book are the types of hope that we need these days. So, in closing, thanks for your time. Thanks for your energy and this conversation, and it's wonderful to meet your son too.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for the interruptions.
Oh, no apologies necessary. So and for those of you that are watching and joined us for this wonderful interview with Melissa Rivero, please check out the Affairs of the Falcóns. I believe the Pueblo City and County and City Library District we do have copies. And the winners of the trivia contest will be contacted by the library somehow, some way. And if it doesn't happen, you let me know, and we'll help you contact them. But regardless, support the author, support Latinx authors and writers, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.